Hey guys, my name is Ryan. I'm a tutor in the Econ Tutoring Center. Today I'm going to do a few problems about the market for loanable funds, and we'll see how the interest rate changes given a change in savings or investment. Remember that language and notation may vary by professor, so always check to confirm that the language we're using is the same as your professors. Okay, so what happens here if the interest rate in the market for loanable funds is lower than the equilibrium interest rate? So let's take a look. So we have a supply of loanable funds and a demand of loanable funds, and I'll kind of emphasize that this is the quantity of loanable funds, and this is the interest rate. Right, so this is, we're going to have some equilibrium interest rate, i.e. here, and then let's say that we're fixed at this interest rate. Okay, so we have this interest rate below, and this is just like any market for, or any price that's below an equilibrium interest rate, right? So we're going to have people who are saving here, so we're going to have a lower quantity of people saving and a higher quantity of people who are going to want to borrow that money at that low interest rate. So, right, because if you have this lower interest rate, you're going to have people who would prefer to now not save that much because they're not getting as high of a return here. So you're going to have a lower than equilibrium quantity supply of loanable funds, but a higher than equilibrium quantity demand of loanable funds. Because now at this lower interest rate, more people are willing to borrow money, right, so they can put it in other investments, right? So the idea here is that if we're at this, we're going to tend to, because these people, there's people over here who would be willing to who would demand loanable funds at a higher interest rate, and people who would be willing to supply it at that higher interest rate. So the idea is that we're going to tend towards that equilibrium here. But say we were fixed at this I star below equilibrium, we're going to have, right, a shortage of loanable funds. But you can also see how there's pressure on these interest rates to move up to that equilibrium level, right? Because there would be people saving who would be willing to supply money to the market of loanable funds at a higher interest rate, and there would be people who would demand it. So it makes sense, of course, that there's pressure to tend towards that equilibrium. Okay, so now we have these questions. What happens if the interest rate in the market for loanable funds, what happens to the interest rate, rather, if the tax law is changed to encourage Americans to save more, right? So if the tax law is encouraged to have people save more, right? If people save more, that increases the supply of loanable funds, right? So we go from supply 1 to supply 2, right, versus this demand, right? And that's going to decrease our equilibrium interest rate. So we go from I1 to I2 here, right? So increasing the supply of loanable funds decreases the interest rate now, because now more and more people are, say, putting money in banks or something. So banks have a higher supply of money, so they'd be willing to loan out that money to potential investors at a lower interest rate. Whereas in this case, it's the same question, but what happens if the tax law changed to get companies to invest more? So that would, right, increase the demand for loanable funds. So we have D1, and that goes up to D2, right? And now that, again, that raises the interest rate, right? Because now more people are willing to, or more people are looking to buy money, right? So there's some competition there for who gets that supply of loanable funds, and that raises up this interest rate to that new higher level. Okay, so this question says, what happens if both of those changes occur at the same time, right? So there's a tax law that encourages people to save more, and it encourages companies to invest more. So we have a couple cases here, right? We have our initial supply and demand, supply 1, demand 1, right? And what can we say about what happens to the equilibrium interest rate, or what can we say about what happens to the quantity of loanable funds? So I should really stress, again, this is loanable funds, right, quantity, and this is interest rate. Right, that's the same on both these graphs. Right, so let's say that in one case the supply of loanable funds goes up by a little bit to S2, and the demand for loanable funds goes up by a lot. Right, then we reach this new equilibrium right here. So this was our initial equilibrium at S1 and D1. Right, now we reach this new equilibrium at a higher interest rate in a higher quantity. Right, so this would have been I1 and I2. This is Q1 and Q2. Right, so in this case, the quantity of loanable funds goes up and the interest rate goes up by a little bit, or rather than the interest rate goes up. Here, let's suppose that instead demand for loanable funds goes up by a little bit to D2, and instead the supply of loanable funds goes up by a lot to S2. Right, well now we have, remember, this was our initial equilibrium one. Right, Q1, I1, and this now is our new equilibrium, I2 and Q2. So look at both these cases. So both these things, are examples of what the question asked, right? Where the demand for loanable funds goes up and the supply for loanable funds goes up. But notice that we have different effects on the interest rate depending on the magnitude of these changes, right? So when demand goes up by more than supply, we see that the equilibrium interest rate goes up, whereas when supply goes up by more than demand, the equilibrium interest rate goes down. But in either case, the quantity of loanable funds is higher than it was in equilibrium. So that's the answer. We can't necessarily say just from this information what happens to the interest rate. The only thing we know for sure is that the quantity of loanable funds goes up. The quantity supplied, rather, and the quantity demanded of loanable funds goes up. So we would have to know something about the magnitude of these changes to know what happens to the interest rate. Okay, hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more about the market for loanable funds. If you have any more questions, come to the Econ Tutoring Center.
Okay, thanks.